Welcome to episode 9 of the Courageous Coach podcast, a podcast where we pull back the curtain on what it really takes to be courageous with your clients, your business, and your life. I'm your host, Melissa Haigh. In this episode, I'm in conversation with Jessie Buscombe. Jessie shares her journey from a civil service career to becoming a coach. Our conversation highlights the importance of safety, choice, and belonging in the coaching profession, encouraging coaches to lean into their individuality while maintaining core values. We chat about the importance of connecting with clients on a personal level, the challenges of dealing with rejection, and the need for coaches to redefine success in a self-employed context. So, are you ready? Let's dive in.
Okay, welcome everyone to the Courageous Coach podcast. Thank you for being here. And today I'm delighted to welcome Jessie Buscombe to the podcast. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Thank you so much for being here, Jessie. And we always start asking you to tell us something. Tell us about yourself.
Well, thank you, Melissa, for having me on. Delighted to be here. And as you kind of mentioned at the start, we may have problems keeping this to our allotted time, because this work that you've done has had so much of an impact on my career and has been sort of really profound. So I'm really thrilled to be here. So in terms of who I am, I think I get asked that a lot, right? As a coach, you're often kind of meeting new clients, and guess what? I still haven't got this kind of down to a really neat drill. But sort of basic elements of my story are, I guess, on a personal level, I'm a born and bred Londoner, and I still work mostly within the capital, so doing quite a lot of face-to-face coaching in and around London, and I still live in the city. And for a long time in my career, I worked right in the heart of the city in Westminster, and I was a civil servant working in a range of government departments over many, many governments, probably more than I would kind of care to list. But let's say they go kind of as far back as the new Labour years, and then they went right up to the Brexit Boris Johnson years. And that's the point at which during some of that government, I decided to leave and set up as a coach and also as a freelance consultant. And so I wear two hats now, which, I mean, maybe we can come and kind of talk into the challenges of wearing two hats and also the benefits. So one of them is around coaching people who still doing the kind of work I was doing, leading within government, both in central government, but also local government and some of the associated agencies that deliver public services. And then I've also, I guess, kind of gamekeeper turned poacher is one way of describing it. I've gone from kind of making policy to doing some work around trying to influence policy. And that has been more my consultancy career. And really that's been grounded a lot in education and skills policy, which is an area I'm massively passionate about and where I used to work in terms of in government.
Okay, so I'm instantly fascinated, right? Because it not an area I'm at all familiar with, that kind of civil service, government, policy making, and I'm immediately intrigued about that world, right? So, okay, I love that poacher turned gamekeeper idea, and also that as you mentioned, which I think is true for so many of us who choose to become coaches or external coaches running our own businesses, is that we end up with some sort of portfolio, right? Different things, whether that's consultancy and coaching, or for me, it's training, learning, delivery, and coaching. So we have this sort of portfolio business, I guess, and that with it, brings, as you said, right, some challenges, but also some real kind of synthesis between the things that we do. And so I was thinking before we came on, Jessie, because we were together recently, weren't we, in a group coaching? We call them circle backs for around this kind of courageous coaching and dare to lead work that we've been doing. And I had that realization that we've been working together since spring 2022, which was when you came on the program. And I was like, wow, and I always feel like that's such a privilege when you get to work. And I've always felt this in my career, even in learning and development. It's not a come on a program, you're done. It's kind of come on the program, and then we've built that continuing kind of learning with each other, from each other, and really kind of built that relationship. So it's so lovely to now be sat here we're sat here in January 2025, and to still be talking about this and the impact that it's having on you today, from doing the learning itself in 2022. That's like a learning and development person's dream, right? So it's really lovely to have you here. So I'm now sort of thinking about the work that you do. And I always start with a question around, what does courageous coaching look like for you in your work? But because of this portfolio element of your work that you mentioned, I'm kind of more leaning towards the question of what does courage look like for you in your work? More perhaps coaching, but more generally as well.
It's a great question, and probably the honest answer is I'm not sure I know, but my reflection on this question is that when I left the civil service, the number one thing a lot of people said to me was, "You're so courageous. It's so brave," and I think that was because, when you're in government, you're in what's essentially perceived as quite a secure career, with a good pension and good benefits. I mean, in reality, as anyone who's working in government knows, and who's been through many reorganisations and a number of challenges, I don't think the kind of reality is always feels as secure as maybe the kind of outside world would have you believe. But still, it was kind of leaving a career that, I definitely could have stayed in. And so I guess, courage is something that often other people see in you rather than you necessarily feel it yourself. And I think of what courage actually feels like for me is kind of leaning into discomfort. It's sitting with and kind of exploring discomfort. And I think I've thought, and one of the things I'm kind of really interested in is what makes people change career or pivot in their career. Okay. And I think that maybe rather than people feeling that they feel really brave, I often sense when they're talking to me that they feel this discomfort, and that can be as bad as like, I'm a frog in boiling water and I've got to jump out. Yeah. Or it can be, it's just a little bit too hot in here. But yeah, I think so I don't know what I don't know what it feels like necessarily to myself. I think it's sometimes something that you perceive in other people more often.
Yeah.
And what you feel in yourself is like discomfort. And I think we're taught in society is to kind of run away from discomfort. Yeah. But I think as I've kind of coached more and through the work I've done with you and the kind of thinkings of Brené Brown and a few others, I've thought of, but what if you sort of sit with that discomfort? So yeah, that's a very kind of long, that's a long politician's non-answer. There you go. I
love it. Well practiced. Yes, absolutely. Speech writer extraordinaire. Yeah. And no, look, because I think that's really interesting, because I think that's really true. One of the things that I think we're very good at is seeing courage in others. So, we see someone doing something, and it doesn't have to be a huge, great, big transitional thing. It might be something very simple, but we look at it and we kind of go, wow, that's really brave that they did that. And often there's a kind of a sort of two drivers for me anyway, where I kind of, particularly if it's someone I know well, then I feel almost there's a little bit of pride. I'm like, I feel proud of them for being courageous. But there's also sort of the underlying thing there for me as well, which is a little bit of, oh, that was brave. I'm not sure I'd be able to do that. Right. We kind of, and yet we're very good at recognizing courage in others. But we don't recognize when we're being courageous, particularly the kind of the just the everyday ordinary courage that we're dealing with. We don't recognize that courage in ourselves. And so your point about becoming aware of the discomfort is super important, because the discomfort comes from the vulnerability, right? I feel really vulnerable. This is uncomfortable. I'm fearful. I maybe feel anxious. Maybe there's some shame, whatever the feelings are. And that is actually your first indicator, if you like, or your strongest measure that you're about to do something brave, right? But you're right. We kind of go, ooh, discomfort. Ooh, don't like that. And therefore we don't step in, or we, in our language, we talk about armoring up, or we self-protect, all of those things happen. And we don't realize often that we've missed an opportunity to be courageous in our work and lives, right? So yeah, that discomfort's almost the early warning. Learn to spot it, sit with it, as you said. It's kind of like the early warning indicator. That's curious. Yeah, totally. And so
I think that's, I think that's spot on. And I often kind of find, particularly with women, when they're about to speak up or speak out on an issue at work, that, I would perceive as a coach or a peer, as a mentor, as a friend, that courage. But what they're feeling is risk. What's the risk to my career? What's the risk to my reputation? And I didn't want to go like really feminist really early on, but I probably take a bit of bait. But I think, when we see kind of images of courage, it's like, often of quite a sort of manly thing of what you do is you get confident and then you have courage, right? So, you sort of inhabit, Lion King type aura, and then you kind of war, right?
Yeah. Okay. Lion King aura. I love that.
But the reality is I can only speak for the experience of most women. I know it's like what the first signs of courage are that discomfort, that sense of risk, the feeling of really out on a limb, rather than, you get to this place of security and then you step into your courage, and there's a kind of time and place for it, because it's always worth doing, but it's not always the nicest experience, so courage looks to me like maybe experiencing something that isn't necessarily comfortable or a nice feeling, and then learning to reward myself later, rather than think I'm going to enjoy being courageous. And that's been just a sort of really simple shift in my mind that's actually enabled me to be more courageous, because if you keep expecting to enjoy it, then maybe you'll never get to that point, and maybe you'll never be courageous.
Yeah. It's so true, right? Because that leans into, what Brené Brown talks about, that idea of, there is no courage without vulnerability. And vulnerability is the emotion we experience in times of risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure, right? So you're absolutely right that it doesn't feel good. And I always say to people, right, that when we start working together, I'm like, and I'm not here to, it's never going to feel good, right? I'm not here to make it easy for you. But what we want to work on is leaning into and sitting with, as you said, that discomfort, that those feelings of vulnerability bring up for us. And I think something else that you made me think of then is that also, I think for many, groups, I mean, you mentioned, women, and so I guess I might say many minority or underrepresented groups. There's also this question around, is it safe for me to step into my courage in this scenario? And sometimes it might not be. And so I think there's that added challenge sometimes that we also have to make a call around how safe do I feel here to, as you said, speak up or speak out. What might the consequences of that be? And sometimes we do it anyway. Maybe we feel it's worth it. It's worth the risk. And sometimes we think it's not right now. And that's the kind of, choosing courage or choosing comfort. I mean, I might argue that it doesn't necessarily feel comfortable, but it's like, do you know what? Now's not the right time. It's not the right day or with the right group of people or whatever. So yeah, safety, I think, or feeling safe is a big part of this as well, for sure.
I think that's so astute, and it kind of makes me think of the work that Susan David does around, toxic positivity. It's like, I sometimes think we may have given in women's kind of leadership programs maybe a bit of the narrative that women have got to go around being courageous and confident all this time, even in settings where there's a risk for them. And yet I know, the reality is that certainly the women I talk to are evaluating, and sometimes, there's, and actually I think this will apply to all leaders of all kind of genders. It's like sometimes there is the time to be courageous, but you actually, because it's challenging, I mean, I don't think you can do it 24/7.
No.
You face, or maybe that's part of how you might face a bit of burnout, really. I mean, like, it's okay to choose sometimes, and not be hard on ourselves because we've gone, or I can't fight on every, or I can't, speak up everywhere on everything, or,
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, coming back to Brene, there's that, one of my favorite quotes, right? You can choose courage or you can choose comfort, but you can't have both. And actually, for me, the really important word in that quote is choice. It is absolutely a choice that you can make. And sometimes we choose comfort. And, I know for me, sometimes I'll think to myself, do you know what? Today's not the day. I didn't sleep well last night. I'm not at my best today. Today's not the day. And that is an act of self-compassion, provided we're also saying to ourselves, and that's okay. That's okay, right? I'm allowed to kind of step back and choose comfort today. Of course, I then get super curious when I notice that there's the same thing that I keep choosing comfort. And I'm like, that's curious. What's going on there? But it is an act of self-compassion to do that. It is always a choice, right?
Yeah.
100%. And so I'm wondering the kind of what you've learned about courage. We've been on this courage building journey together, developing skill set and mindset really around courage and what it means to be courageous. And so I'm wondering, almost like the before and after, what's changed for you in your coaching work? Now you kind of have, or you don't have them maybe, but we do have them, but you're developing those skills. What's changed?
I think a big thing has changed for me is just how comfortable I feel with the label of being a coach and being part of the coaching industry. I can kind of really remember in one of our sessions, I think I had a bit of a meltdown at you of but I don't come from HR and, I'm not this kind of coach and I do have opinions and I'm interested in politics and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. And I think there were a lot of things for me where I kind of came into the coaching world, and yeah, I had a bit of a sort of funny reaction to it, and it was not funny, but it didn't really kind of. I felt a bit of an odd one out, even though actually on the face of it, I really should have fitted in. I'm like a middle-aged white woman, and let's be clear, and I don't think this is a good thing. The coaching industry is not diverse because it is filled with people that kind of look and sound like me. And I think that's a massive problem for the industry. And it's one that kind of plays on my mind a lot. But having said, although I kind of looked the part, I didn't really feel the part, I think, just because I had a different background. I had a different portfolio of things. And so I kind of really valued all the coaches I was meeting who came from these, I guess, what I would consider more traditional backgrounds into coaching. Many of these people have been my coaches, and they were kind of excellent. But I felt I couldn't quite be a coach like them, and I was giving myself a hard time.
Yeah.
And I was on a bit of a stream of like consciousness to you of like, well, I'm not this and I'm not that and da da da, and and I'm a bit sweary, and although I think I am actually that sweary in coaching conversations, just in supervision. And you said, but that's the point, that's maybe where you step into being the best coach. And so for me, it's a really simple thing, but I think it's something that people struggle with like all the time, both in career change and in leadership roles, is basically the kind of challenge of being good, but being different, I know it's really cliche, but kind of being true to yourself and turning up like, aware of who you are and the foibles, but like bringing the best of who you are, And the moment I kind of lent into that, and maybe just lent in a bit more to, what the asset I do bring to people when I coach them is in the civil services, I have done all those roles. I have been in difficult conversations with ministers. I do know what that context is like. And by the way, I still know about it, So if you start talking about some area of policy, I've got some background knowledge. And for me, I think I probably am not totally aligned with this whole thing of the ICF of like, knowing the sector is almost a disadvantage. For me, I think as long as you're not stepping into a vice, for me, I've seen it has been an advantage for my clients to understand there's some really specific things to working in government. And I think if you've done it, you can kind of bring that. And if you're interested in politics and policy, that's going to help someone who's leading in that context. I think that's going to, so I think I stopped worrying about like all the things I kind of wasn't, and I just relaxed into a bit of who I was. Mm-hmm. And then, that was a game changer for me.
I mean, I'm immediately reminded of the kind of difference between fitting in and belonging, right? And, belonging is about, not needing to change who you are, just be who you are. Whereas fitting in is, what should I wear? What should I look like? What should I say, in order to fit into this group? And, there are a lot of coaches out there. It's, we call ourselves, I'm part of the coaching profession. There's lots of kind of comparing and, more, what do I need to be in order to be a valid and maybe valued part of this profession? And I remember when we first met, actually, even before the program, we kind of met at that really fortuitous, I guess, for us, that cusp of, I've done my coach training. I know what being and doing coaching should look like. Now I'm trying to work out how I put that on, how it fits me. And I think that was your, that work that you did around, well, who am I and how does this fit with me? What kind of coach do I want to be? And I think we all do that, don't we? That kind of, I want my own, yes, I'm a coach, but what's my identity? Yes. We've all learnt the same tools and the models and looked at the competency framework and all of that stuff. But who am I in this? How do I want to show up? And then having the courage to show up as yourself as a coach. That's where the real sweet spot is, right? Definitely.
Yeah, 100%, which actually kind of, I mean, now you say all that, it's like I'm sort of, while I've changed careers, I might be just repeating some stuff I did earlier in my career because, funnily enough, the civil service has the same thing where it has competencies, which is why this kind of word competencies was a bit triggering to me, and it might be to any ex-civil servant. It's like, oh my God, I've left the civil service to get away from these competencies, because it's a kind of way of, for someone like me, it's, I don't know, this might be a kind of only child thing, but it's like, I don't like to be sort of boxed into I don't like to be standardized, really,
I get it.
I kind of rebel against it. I mean, intellectually, I get the need to have standards and consistency, and I'm intellectually totally pro professionalizing, the civil service or the coaching profession, but kind of emotionally, I'm a total rebel at heart and want to kick back against all those things and kind of find my own path.
Yeah.
So it is that process I've gone through of sort of, and it's the same thing when I came to civil service, of probably not feeling that maybe I did look like a lot of people, but I didn't really think or feel or respond like other people. And it's, how can I take the kind of the essence of the core things that are absolutely essential. So for instance, I would pick on absolutely in the civil service in being impartial. If you're not willing to show up to say that you're there to serve a minister, whether you personally voted for them or not, then you shouldn't be there. And you shouldn't show up to a coaching conversation unless you will hold that confidentiality for that client 100%. These things I hold so kind of dear to my heart, but then elsewhere I want some flexibility for my individuality to kind of come through, because that's a very strong driver for me.
And I'm also really conscious that, when we think about, the kind of clients that we work with, the kind of space, as you said, you're doing, still doing a lot of coaching in the civil service, but, whatever kind of space, if you like, we're coaching in, industry or sector or type of client, whatever, is that I think that idea of, they don't care, do they? They don't care what the competency standard says. I don't know, right? But they don't care.
No.
What they care about is the person in front of them that they either connect with or they don't connect with. And I just think that the more you belong, your own sense of belonging, your own sense of identity and who you are as a coach and how you want to show up, the more that you connect with the kind of clients that you want to work with and they want to work with you. People can spot a carbon copy a mile off, and so this idea of doing the work to get clear on, who am I as a coach within all, as you said, within all of the boundaries that, are important. And some of them are very, I hold dear as my own values, but who am I in this space? That's what the client connects with, right? Not which competency did we just meet? Which just as caveat, just as you did, I'm going to say, I'm all up for standardizing and professionalizing and all very important. But I'm all about the human that is the coach, right? Because that's what the client connects with.
Yeah, and I think you kind of go through this process as a coach. At first, it's kind of understanding the tools and the techniques, and then the more you get into it, it's about working on yourself, because that's what you're bringing, right? And so if you've got kind of biases or hang-ups, or you're grumpy or you're angry or you're scared or you're what you're bringing that in, and you always use the word curious. It's now before a session, it's not like I'm going to my models and my questions. I'm more like, just check in. What kind of state of mind am I in? Like, where do I need to have a word with myself? Sometimes I'm like, and that would be more important, so that I come in the right space of time, that in the right frame of mind, I meant to say.
Yeah.
Then I had, the techniques and tools are kind of important, but I think that's the work that you, and I've had some incredible supervisors who've helped me do. And I get asked quite a lot about coaching by other people. And I think the thing I maybe haven't been brave enough to say, but I would want to say, is like, if you're not up for that work on yourself, like, this is not the profession for you. Like, and that work on yourself is quite hard sometimes, because it's like looking at the bits of yourself that you're like, oh, what judgment did I bring in there, or what bias, or whatever. I kind of enjoy that, as I find it is the discomfort sometimes as well, but I enjoy it. I was going to say the other thing I just wanted to say about how I guess this work changed me was getting comfortable with rejection in my coaching work. And it's very kind of simply to say, I guess, if you're comfortable with who you are as a coach, people will connect to you, but people will also disconnect from you.
Yeah.
And that's good. Like, they should. Some people should meet me and think, no, she's not the right coach for me. And that's great. And that's good for them to think that, and we don't work together and they find another coach who is. But I think maybe when you're first kind of changing career, or when you're feeling vulnerable, that dealing with that rejection is
hard.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
But it's made me more, and just generally being kind of freelance has made me more confident in dealing with that,
Definitely.
Because it is part of, like, when you step into doing the work you want to do and being the person sort of revealing more of yourself, some people are going to say, yes, thank you very much. And some people are going to say,
not for me.
Not for me.
Yeah, totally. And I think it actually is a really interesting, because you're touching on two points there, which I think are super important for coaches, particularly new coaches, but also for new coaches who are, or not new, or novice coaches who are, stepping into self-employment or setting up their own business. Because I think that the rejection is hard, we said. I think sometimes it's crippling, because not only does it feel like not only can it feel like a sort of personal, they don't like me, and we all want to be liked, right? So there's that sort of personal, like, hurt, if you like, that comes with that. And then there's also the pressure of, but I really need the money, or I really need to start building my client list, and or all of that pressure that we get, that we set ourselves, right, when we're building a business. It'd be lovely if we were doing it for free, and maybe it would be lovely if the money wasn't an issue, and for maybe some, for some people it may not be, but I think for most people, you're there to earn a living, and so that it's sort of like two sides of the same coin, right? There's the personal, that hurt, they don't like me, and then there's also that, that would have been a really lovely piece of income, and now I haven't got it, and so I think we've both been on that journey of getting to the, it doesn't, does it still hurt? I'm thinking from my perspective now. I think what I'm able to do now is that when a client says no, and I think I still do get a little twinge of, that, is it me? Is there something wrong with it? But I'm now curious about it, rather than running down the rabbit hole of self-doubt and, beating myself up. And I'm just curious, okay, why did that show up with that client? Let me just think about that for a moment. And you learn over time that, if you're good at what you do, which, the money comes, right? The clients if you do it right, the right clients come, and now we're in that wonderful position where we're like, actually, that client said no, or I said no to that client. Oh my goodness, what, that's almost, even now I'm like, whoa, I just said no. You're not the right client for me. Just as I may not be the right coach for you. So it's real empowerment. I don't know. There's something good about that, but yeah, I don't think that goes away. That idea of rejection hurts a little bit, but we can just be curious about it and know that it's normal for it to not feel great when someone says no to work with you, right?
Yeah. Well, because I think Brené Brown talks about she talks about kind of rejection also, as in you make a kind of leap for connection and you get rejection, and so there's, there's that kind of shows up, I think. I mean, it shows up in people's personal life, but it shows up at work as well.
Yeah.
And I think being self-employed is like incredibly sort of vulnerable in very many ways, because you're trying to kind of connect with people to offer services in a whole range of ways, and some of that comes and some of it doesn't. And I think it's also can be very unpredictable. So I've had things I thought were going to come to fruition didn't, and then something will kind of pop in that you weren't expecting, or someone you spoke to a year ago will come back and say, oh yeah, I do want to do that coaching. And you kind of, because actually often it's worth saying, and something I would say to less experienced coaches is sometimes you won't even know, you're just here, and I also talk to, friends, and I see stuff on LinkedIn, and it's quite right, in the consultancy world, you can be ghosted sometimes, so I'm lucky that's not really been a thing for me. And I've kind of, 9 times out of 10 always known, but, that happens to people. So you have to do a lot of work to kind of self-assess. And the culture I came from in the civil service, I mean, first of all, rejection, it happens, and it happens to people when they go for a promotion, but it isn't that often, whereas if you're self-employed, it can be happening to you like, every week if you want, alongside success, right? Because that's the thing. Lots of success, more success comes in, and lots of rejection comes in. But coming from employed culture, I think, we don't probably put ourselves up for stuff as often. So you're kind of not maybe exposed to it. And then I also think the other challenge I had is the kind of whole culture of kind of appraisal and other people assessing you. It sort of, means at worst you become a little bit infantilized in that you're dependent on the judgment of others. And I think some of the bravery that maybe has to come when you step into coaching and self-employment is you have to self-assess, like you were saying, like nobody's going to come and do your appraisal. And sometimes you really don't know why a client turned you down. It could be that they didn't have budget, or it could be that they thought you were like no good. And you'll just never know that. And you'll have to go through in your head, and then at some point you'll have to turn off going through that in your head. Otherwise you'll be ruminating from now, and you just got to move on,
Absolutely.
But that's when I say kind of coaches have to do the work on themselves. I think they have to do you have to self-assess and do the appraisal on yourself as well, Yeah.
I think one of the things I realized quite early on, transitioning from employed to self-employed, is that I almost had to not just redefine what success looked like for me, because that's thrown out there all the time, let's redefine what success looks like for you. It was actually for me working out how I was going to measure success, because the ways that I measured success in employed life, you're quite right, was appraisals, other people's feedback, which I got through appraisals. It was, targets, achieving objectives, KPIs, and all of that was almost served up to me on a plate in employed life. Here it is. When you've achieved, you'll be successful. And you kind of never questioned it, really. I mean, you may have done, but that's how it happened. And then I got into self-employed life and I was like, there's nobody giving me objectives and KPIs and there's nobody measuring me against those anymore. It's like, okay, how will I know? Because I'd swallowed whole that thing that we're told, which is that, in order to know that you've been successful, it has to be measurable in some way.
Yeah.
And by measure, I was thinking about quantity, quality, numbers. And I'm like, that's not how I measure success anymore. Yeah. It isn't a spreadsheet with, well, this was the objective and this is when I made, and that's how much money I made. I mean, maybe plenty of self-employed people do that, but I had to work out a whole new measurement process so that I could know in my heart that I was being successful in a way that was meaningful to me. So yeah, it is. Yeah, I loved it when you said it sort of infantilizes us a little bit, because I think for me it made me lazy. It made me lazy. I didn't have to worry about what success looked like. Somebody told me and they gave me a measure for it. And now I'm responsible for my own success, defining it and measuring it. And that's been certainly for me quite a big learning curve, I think. Being a grown up, being an adult and not waiting for someone else to do it for me, right?
Yeah. And I often think maybe because sometimes I'm at a certain stage of my career where, I don't know what like the next 20 years hold, and I have plans and I have ideas, but one thing I've learned is you can't absolutely kind of predict that. So sometimes I play around in my head of like, well, what would the self-employed person take back into employed status? And one would be to self-assess more, right? Regardless actually of the feedback that you're served up, you don't, people get so kind of hung up on, and I know it's important for progression and bonuses and, but, feedback is subjective, right? Sometimes you might get positive feedback and actually self-assess that you could have done a bit better, and that's valid. And equally, sometimes you'll get feedback that you might self-assess is wrong, and it might be coming from someone's bias, but that's something I would take back into employment. If I ever went in, it's something you can't kind of unset really, because once you've had to do it for yourself, I think you can't kind of put that genie back in the bottle. And
no, I
would try and get that into somehow wire that more into the way that we help. And I think I try to do this when I'm talking with coaches about their career. I try to get them to self-assess, so sometimes we look at feedback they've had on their leadership style. But the question always in my mind is, what resonates for you? What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? And why? Rather than kind of coming and just accepting it,
What's your assessment?
Yeah, what's your assessment
of this? Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Which is a great thing for people to bring to coaching, roundabout kind of feedback or appraisal time. But that I've noticed a bit of a mindset shift for people, because people often want to bring in a piece of feedback and they'll say to me, my boss, my director says, I'm X, Y, and Z, so let's work on that. And I'm like, can we dial back a stage and say, do you agree? Do you agree with that? What corroborates that? Do you agree with that? And it can be, yes, it can be lots of things too.
You've reminded me, because this was a leader of mine a few years ago now who, we've all had, the worst leader and the best leader and all of that stuff. And he's one of the best leaders I had. And, we were talking about the very age old quote, that, feedback is a gift. Which I'm like, I was always a little bit uncomfortable with, but he said, it is a gift. But because it's a gift, you get to choose what you do with it. You can unwrap it. You can shove it in a drawer and decide not to unwrap it. You can unwrap it, look at it and go, actually, it's not really for me, and re-gift it. Give it to someone else, right? It's a gift. So therefore it's your choice what you do with it. I was like, Oh my goodness. That is like, yeah, you're right. It's this idea of feedback as a gift, and therefore you should always accept it and be grateful that you've been given it, right? And it's like, no, it's a choice. It's, it's just a gift. You get to choose, how pleased you are with that gift. Like, Granny's knitted jumper at Christmas, or the umpteenth pair of socks you've opened, or, whatever, right? So yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's so true.
Gifts go to charity shops, right? Yeah. Probably now they're all full of some, right?
Totally. Yeah, you can probably go around and notice all of that. Oh, that's a reading moment. Yes, totally.
Yeah, the phrase I heard once, and it's about corroborating, and I kind of tried to do this a bit, and it was something like someone said, if one person tells you you're drunk, you can still go to the bar, but if 3 people tell you you're drunk, it's time to leave the pub. So it's like kind of, often getting a bit analytical, right? About people's kind of opinions of yourself, So particularly when I'm kind of working with leaders around leadership style, trying to help them look for if there's something they want to work on, a pattern really, and often, what's the pattern between the internal story we're telling ourselves? And is that, because often that's very self-critical, and is that corroborated by others? But yeah,
I love that. I'm gonna take that, because I've not heard that before. So let me just check I've got that right. So if one person tells you that you're drunk, you could still go to the bar. If 3 people tell you you're drunk, then you should probably leave the pub.
Yeah,
right. I love that. Because that's true. That's so true, right? Corroborating your evidence, right? Yeah, totally. Yeah. I'm so using that. That's brilliant. Jessie, I'm loving this conversation. And you said at the beginning, rightly, we could be talking for hours here, because there's so much richness. So I'm like, we're going to definitely have to do a part 2 for sure. But I always close the podcast conversation by asking, what's one thing that you think every coach should know about courage?
That you can't do coaching without it.
Okay. I like that. Yeah, you can't do coaching without it. Okay. I'm going to take a breath and then say thank you, Jessie. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing yourself and engaging in a lovely, great conversation, as I knew it would be. But yeah, it's been a real pleasure. So thank you very much.
I've really enjoyed it. And as you said, we could have gone for hours.
Yeah.
Whether listeners would have appreciated that, I don't know.
Probably not. Probably not. But what?
If 3 people tell you to stop talking, then
let's give feedback.
Podcast.
Yeah, because if it's 1, then we can do a part 2. Yeah, brilliant. Lovely, Jessie. Thank you so much. You take care.
You too.
Thank you for listening to the show. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. You can visit my website, melissahaig.com, to find out more about the work I do to help coaches like you be more courageous with their clients, their business, and their lives.